Hello and welcome to another edition of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star and Irish Mirror's crime podcast. I'm Paul Healy, I'm the paper's crime correspondent, and today I'm speaking with our crime and defence editor, Michael O'Toole. This is the fifth day of the trial of Jozef Puska. So Mr Puska of Lynalley Grove in Mucklagh in County Offaly, he's on trial for the murder of the 23-year-old school teacher, Ashling Murphy. He's pleaded not guilty to her murder, and this, as I say, is the fifth day of the trial. So, Mick, you were in the courtroom today, and I understand we had evidence from a paramedic who attended the scene, and we also saw the first bit of CCTV footage in the trial today.
Yeah, Paul, that's right. There were actually 4 witnesses today. I think the last 2 days when you were in court, there were 8. So yes. Obviously today we had 4, but one of them did take quite a long time. And he stepped, is a Garda witness, Garda David Harney. He brought the jury and the judge, Mr. Justice Tony Hunt, through quite a significant, I think there were more than 50 different clips of CCTV footage. But at I'm not going to say interrupted, but his evidence was broken up briefly to let a second paramedic give evidence. So we will go through this, but there were 2 paramedics, as listeners will know, who were two of the first responders to Miss Murphy when she died, and they both talked about basically trying to save her life and trying to keep her alive and what efforts they took. But so the first witness today was a paramedic called Paul McCabe. Now he was with Kieran Daly, who will hear later on. He gave evidence. But Paul McCabe is an advanced paramedic. He's actually based out of Athlone in County Westmeath. But by chance, he and Mr. Daly were in Tullamore on a job on the 12th of January 2022 when they got a call at 14:49, I believe, saying that they had to get to Cappincur very quickly. Now, the initial call, they believed it was a cardiac arrest. So they're advanced paramedics, so they sped to the scene. Mr. McCabe said that while they were on the route, it became apparent, they became aware that Gardaí were there, and it was being treated as an assault case. So Kieran Daly was driving. Mr. McCabe said that they got to the scene. They came across the first Garda cordon, which we know was a Garda car at Digby Bridge, quite close to where Miss Murphy was found. Got there at 14:56, so it took 7 minutes, I believe, for them to get to the scene. They got to the scene. They drove through they were led through the first cordon where the Garda car was, and they got down to where they could see 2 Gardaí working on Miss Murphy in the undergrowth or on the embankment. We know that she was found really in briars. That's where she was recovered from first. That's where the 2 Gardaí were, as you'll know, Paul, they were trying to do CPR on her. So Mr. McCabe got out of the car of the ambulance first and ran over, and he could see that they were working on her and that they were performing CPR on her. And he said he started working, and he essentially basically made the decision to improve the quality of care that he could give her. He said it was best that they basically drag Miss Murphy from the undergrowth on the embankment up onto the canal itself.
So I understand after making the decision to take Miss Murphy out from the undergrowth, they brought her out onto the tarmac and they brought out the defibrillator. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially, he said his first view of her was that she was lying on her back in the undergrowth. Now, the undergrowth had been flattened because obviously the 2 Gardaí were working and trying to save her life. But he did say that her left foot was suspended, her head was turned to her left side, and he was watching the Gardaí do CPR. Now, because of the area she was in, as you say, we had to try and extricate her to the tarmac. So we had to create a chain, he said, to drag her up the embankment. And it was then that he realized, he could see that it was a woman. So as I say, he did create the chain and to get what he said was the patient out. Now, he said her jacket came off as we dragged her up the embankment. He then grabbed the defibrillator, and he observed by the stage that her jacket had come off. He could see that she was wearing a sports top. She had tracksuit bottoms on. Her hair was matted, and he could not see her face. Now, he decided, for a number of reasons, that the hair was probably matted from blood loss and condensation and other issues. He said he could see a substantial wound or a number of wounds to the right side of her neck. Her mouth was wide open, and as I said, there were a number of wounds on her right throat. He brought out the defibrillator. Now, the defibrillator, you essentially have to put it on the patient's chest. When he was doing that, he could see no wounds on her body, on her chest. There was some tissue, but that wasn't an injury. He put the defibrillator pads on. There was no sign of life, and she could not be shocked. A defibrillator essentially works by shocking the heart and the rhythm and bringing heart back to operation. So he decided, and that the patient was dead. He said Ashling looked dead at this stage. Her skin was pale and cold, and she could not make any effort to make movement. He used stethoscopes to listen to their heart, also checked her pulse and pupils, and they were fixed and dilated. So it was his decision to cease resuscitation. As you know, there was CPR efforts underway. It was his decision to cease resuscitation after consulting with colleagues and Gardaí at the scene. So his last act essentially was to cover Miss Murphy with a blanket once he realised she was dead. And he stayed at the scene for quite some time until he was released by Gardaí.
And as you say, he concluded there were no signs of life. He said that her pupils were dilated. There was no pulse. So, I mean, I know he went through the technical terms, but I think the quote was something to the effect of there was nothing more that could be done for her.
Yeah, he did say that under cross-examination by the defence counsel that, he did confirm that the Gardaí and the paramedics, himself and Mr. Daly, had made strenuous efforts really to try and save Miss Murphy's life, but there was nothing they could do.
And as you mentioned, a blanket then was placed over her body, and she was officially, as we heard from the evidence yesterday, I think she was officially declared dead just before 6 o'clock that evening.
Yes, yeah, he was asked about that. That was a doctor, so a doctor essentially confirmed it, but he had called the death essentially from just a few moments after he arrived. He knew there was nothing they could do.
Mm-hmm. The next witness then, I believe, was Detective Garda Ronan Lawler.
Yes, Detective Garda Lawler is attached to the Technical Bureau. He's part of the Forensics Investigation section in that unit, and he has been in that unit for 16 years. So you obviously said there, Paul, that the doctor confirmed death at around 6 o'clock. Detective Garda Lawler arrived on the scene at just before 10 to 7, so just before 7 p.m. So he arrived at the northern bank of the Grand Canal in Tullamore. He went into the crime scene, and he saw a tent that was erected, a crime scene tent, a blue crime scene tent. He entered that tent, and he said he observed a deceased female on the ground. And again, he said he could see numerous wounds on the right side of the deceased's neck. Now, he did go into some detail about attending a scene like this. We'll all have seen this in the movies, but also in real life. You will see forensics officers. They're what we call suited and booted. So they've got a white protective suit on with a hood. They would have masks on. The hood would be up. Gloves would be on. And interestingly, he says the gloves are regularly changed for evidential reasons. So he helped remove Miss Murphy's body into a body bag for the undertakers. And he did clarify that bags had been placed around the hands of Miss Murphy. Then he saw another tent, and he looked inside there. On top, there was plastic sheeting, and under that there was a bike. And he said he looked at the photograph of the bike, and he confirmed that's the bike that he had seen. So he also saw it. He saw a pink hat and a pair of two runners on the scene as well. So the next day, and he also saw sunglasses and various other items which he bagged. So the next day, he was involved in postmortem. Dr. Collis, you were there for Dr. Collis, did the postmortem the next day. He but he would have taken fingerprints. But he did attend the postmortem, and he said that Dr. Collins' clothing were removed from Miss Murphy. And that included a bloodstained scarf, a GAA top. Now, all the items that Detective Garda Lawler spoke about were shown to the jury. So, as I said, there were some items that he said he bagged, he spotted and bagged at the scene. So that would have been things like the runners. It would have been sunglasses, and we know that there was an apple core. He would have bagged all them. So all these items were bagged and shown to the jury, but other items that were taken from Miss Murphy during the PM were also shown individually in bags. So we have the bloodstained scarf, the GAA top, the top was a green and blue. I also had a white blood-stained T-shirt. Then there was a necklace that said Ashling on it, a gold ring, and a watch was shown. We understand. I think it's Garda Lawler said it was a Fitbit watch. Mm-hmm. So all those. The way it works is Gardaí who do exhibits like that would write their initials and a number. So it was RL5, RL6. So when thinking about the necklace, for example, is RL. So it's Ronan Lawler. That stands for RL28. So, the RL5 and 5 and 6 were the runners, respectively. And 6 was the right runner, 5 was the left runner. So they were all carefully tied.
So as you say, the jury was shown those items. So am I right in saying that you yourself, being in the courtroom, that you would have seen these items, these bagged items as well, the woolly hat and the jersey and all these items?
Yeah, that's right, Paul. And the one, and obviously we were like you. I was live tweeting during the course, during the court hearing today. So it's very hard because you're concentrating and you don't want to look up. But one that I do remember really looking at would be the GAA top, and I remember having a good look at it because it was a sort of bottle green. It wasn't a dark green, and there was blue in it, and you could see the yellow stripes on the arms as well. So that was one that I did have a good look at.
Right. The next witness and probably the main witness of the day was Garda David Harney, and he led the court through much of the CCTV evidence in this case.
Yes. So Garda Harney, Miss Anne-Marie Lawler, who's the senior counsel for the state, the main prosecutor, said that Garda Harney would be on the stand for 2 or 3 hours, and I think she was quite accurate in that. So the first thing he did was he basically took the jury through a map of Tullamore, and with all the buildings that are marked on it that have cameras on it. So that took up quite some time. And he also basically they also showed the jury photographs based on the map. So say, for example, if there was a camera at Church View, they would have taken a photograph of the view from the camera, and they would have taken photographs of the camera. So, and they did various things, like they showed photographs of Tesco. We will hear evidence about Tesco and that sort of thing. So much of it really was scene setting and preliminary. But then just before lunch, we started to see CCTV footage. Now, as I said, I think there were about maybe between somewhere, I wasn't counting, but my belief would be there were somewhere between 50 and 60 different CCTV footage, clips of CCTV footage, both in Tullamore on the day of Miss Murphy's death, but also in Crumlin in South Dublin on the 13th of January, which was the day after Miss Murphy's death. Now, just to explain this, there are 4 tranches of CCTV, and it did go on. I think it was probably 3 hours. Miss Lawler was right. So we're not going to go into minute detail, but really it's important to say there are 4 tranches of separate tranches of CCTV, which we can sort of group together just to explain to people. The first is accepted CCTV footage of Mr Puska cycling around Tullamore early in the afternoon of the 12th of January. Then another tranche of CCTV is that of Miss Murphy leaving her school in Durrow, Scoil Neve Colmkilla in Durrow, about 2:30 on the 12th of January, and driving into Tullamore, and we can talk later about that. The third group of CCTV is what the state alleges is Mr Puska in Tullamore between 8:55 p.m. and 9:14 p.m. after the death on the night of the 12th of January, after the death of Miss Murphy. And then the final piece of tranche of CCTV, there were several clips, goes between on the 13th of January, so the day after Miss 13th of January, a quarter past way of Mr Puska in Crumlin and in another part of South Dublin.
Right. And I mean, as you mentioned, this witness gave evidence for 2 to 3 hours, but just to give people an idea, in this case in its entirety, we heard there is over 25,000 hours of CCTV. Is that right?
Yeah, and it has been boiled down, but Garda David Harney, just to give an example, at the end of the hearing today, he said he spent 3 months specifically looking at CCTV, nothing else. That was his job for 3 months, looking at CCTV. And then the rest of 2022, he would have done it part-time. So obviously they had to go through a huge amount of CCTV, and they distilled down. And as I said, the jury was shown between 50 and 60 CCTV pieces of footage, basically, today.
Should we deal with the footage of Mr Puska first? Because that is, as you mentioned, it's accepted footage of Mr Puska on his bike in the Tullamore area, and this is in the hours prior to the incident at hand, the alleged murder of Miss Murphy.
Yeah, and you mentioned 25,000. You're absolutely right, Paula. Actually, and Garda Harney actually said the precise number. There were 25,213 hours of CCTV harvested in the investigation. So the first tranche is of Mr Puska. It's accepted it's Mr Puska on a bike between 12:25 and 14:05 on the 12th of January. Now, the first clip, shall we say, is as you'll know, Mr Puska has an address at Llanelly Grove in Muckla, and the first bit of footage is of him cycling through Muckla at around 12:25 on the 12th of January. So then it keeps on going through, and there are various parts. You can see the footage basically maps him cycling around, cycling to Tullamore, cycling around Tullamore until about 2 p.m. on the 12th of January. But in that footage, there are several clips that show Mr Puska cycling in the same in separate clips, shall we say, or separate groups of clips, shall we say. There are two sections, I suppose, that show Mr Puska cycling in the same direction as two separate women. So in the first one, it is a lady who is walking around Tullamore, and you can see the footage shows Mr Puska. It shows the lady walking, several clips, and Mr Puska is seen cycling in the same direction. And in some cases, there are stills, and you can see the two of them in the same frame. Okay. Then the second grouping of footage in relation to a lady is of another lady. It's about 20 minutes later in Tullamore, and that's the lady out walking her dog. And again, there were several clips of Mr Puska cycling in the same direction as that lady.
Okay. And just from your own eyes, I mean, it was accepted by the court, I understand this. Some of the footage seemed to be very, very good quality, and some of it not of very good quality at all.
Yes, you can hear Garda Harney did actually say at one stage, this bit of footage is terrible. So some of it was really, really good, really, really clear, and others were questioning. I think the stuff, obviously, the footage that the state alleges or says is that of Mr. Puska at night. It's dark. It's not very clear. So really what you're doing, what were happening there is, and that was between 8:55 p.m. and 9:14 p.m. You basically, you had Garda Harney saying, I believe that's Mr. Puska. I believe that's the same person. And in some cases, it is very hard to make out. But Garda Harney would say, you know, I examined the footage based on timing, the gait and everything. I believe this is the same person. And at one stage, you know, he does talk about clothing and that sort of thing as well.
And in the footage that is accepted to be Mr. Puska, what did he look like in the footage? What could you make out from and what was said in the court about his description in the footage?
Oh, I mean, you could see he had tight hair and he had a beard. It was said repeatedly of the stuff, the first tranche, so the stuff on the early afternoon of the 12th of January, the court heard that it was accepted, that there was no dispute, that it was clearly Mr. Puska.
Mm-hmm. I believe he's wearing like a black tracksuit with the white stripe down it, and as you mentioned, he has a shaved head, and he has seems to have a bit of a beard on his face.
Figure tracksuit bottoms with a white stripe, and at one stage in the evening, the contentious or the contended or the claimed footage of Mr. Puska, the footage that the state says is Mr. Puska, Garda Harney says, you can see a white stripe, and he says, I can see the letter G in that, and I believe I can see the whole word hill figure in that.
Okay. Then we had footage from Muckla National School, and this is about 12:25 in the afternoon, and this is footage again of Mr. Puska, as you mentioned. Following that, there is footage of Miss Murphy. Is that right?
Yes. So that footage starts at 14:37, and that's north of Tullamore. It's Scoil Neve Colmkilla, which is in Durrow in County Offaly. It's a few kilometres north of Tullamore. And when the footage comes on, you can see a lady walking out of the school, of the main entrance to the school, and Garda Harney looks at the footage and says, that's Miss Ashling Murphy. It's a woman walking along the screen, and he says she is walking towards her car. She had a red Seat car, as we know, and there is footage of that car pulling out of the car park. At 14:48, so 11 minutes later, there is footage of Miss Murphy's car at a place called Corna, close to Tullamore, and the car is driving in the direction of Tullamore. Then at 14, very close to Tullamore, then at 14:50, the car is caught on camera at Callery Street in Tullamore. And then at 14:55 hours, Miss Murphy has parked her car and she is seen walking from her car. So she is at 14:55, as I say, she is seen walking on a towpath, which leads to a bridge. That bridge in turn leads to Fiona Pender Way, which is part of the Grand Canal. Now, at various stages, as I said, still images of the CCTV were shown. So there were, I don't know, maybe a dozen still images, maybe less, but there were several, there were several, shall we say, still images of Mr Puska earlier in the day cycling around Tullamore. They did it in Garda Harney, also showed a still image of Miss Murphy, and she's seen wearing a pink bobble hat, the jacket, a scarf, and runners. So first of all, so what happened was we saw this. Now it's a bit far away, but you can see Miss Murphy walking, and then they showed the jury a close up, and you can see all the items that I mentioned there: the bobble hat, the jacket, the scarf, and the runners.
Yeah, and as we've said, we've heard mention of these items, and some of a pink hat and these other items were shown to the jury today as well.
Yes. So then the next tranche, as I said, there were four. So that's 2 out of the 4, shall we say, and both of those are accepted. The first one is the accepted footage of Mr Puska cycling around Tullamore early in the afternoon. Then the second accepted is that of Miss Murphy leaving her school and driving to Tullamore and then walking to the canal. So the third piece of section of CCTV footage is the state is making allegations, or the state is saying that the person in the footage is Mr Puska, and that is between 8:55 p.m. on the 12th of January. So we know by this stage Miss Murphy had been pronounced dead. That was around 6 o'clock, and the Gardaí were called to the scene of the Grand Canal at roughly 3:30 p.m. So this is several hours later. So it's at 8:55 p.m. to 9:14 p.m. Now, it is night. It is January. Is obviously very dark. So it is, some of the footage is very hard to make out. So Mr. Garda Harney basically says, in his view, having repeatedly examined the CCTV, he said he believes that figure seen in various items of CCTV and clips of CCTV is Mr. Puska.
And then there's footage in Crumlin in Dublin later that evening. Yes.
So I'll just talk briefly about one example. At 9 p.m., exactly 9 p.m., there's a figure in dark clothing walking towards, this is at Fitzpatrick's garage in Templemore, and he said, Garda Harney says, he said it's the same, believes it's the same person that has been seen in the previous footage that he says in the previous footage. He says, I believe it is a tight haircut, the person was less than average height and had a slim build. He said he can see the letter G on the trousers and believes it says Hill figure. So he says he believes that is the same footage. And he said it is the same, I would say that is the same. But you're quite right, Paul. The next group, and that is at the Oak apartment complex in Crumlin in South Dublin. Okay, and so the sequence is at January 13th, 00:58 hours, there's a camera above the apartments, and we can see a car pulling up. 3 people get out of the car. It's except that the 3 people are Mr. Puska's father, his mother, and the third person himself. Miss Garda Harney says of Mr. Puska, he appears to and has a phone in his hand. He also said he has changed his clothing. So that's at then fast forward to 11:56, so almost 12 hours. 11 hours later, Mr. Puska is being brought out of this on the same camera. He's being brought out of the apartment in what Garda Harney was called a carry chair to an ambulance. So, you've probably seen the image of, it's not exactly, it's a chair, sort of, but it's not a stretcher. So you're basically sitting up, but he had a blue hospital blanket over, a blue ambulance blanket over, and I think he was sort of strapped in. So that's at 11:56. He's been brought in a carriage here to the ambulance. So fast forward then to 12:13. So 16 minutes later, and this is at St James's Hospital, and Mr Puska is seen in a stretcher being brought into the hospital, and Garda Harney says Mr Puska has shaved at this point. So after that was the end of the thing, he was Garda Harney was cross-examined about one element of the footage. You may remember that I spoke about Miss Murphy being seen walking towards the canal, and he's cross-examined about that, and basically is asked, "What can you see what the person is doing with their hands?" And he said he can't really see. And he was also asked, he did say in evidence that at one stage he watched footage 100 times, then 30 or 40 times, and he did say both. He says he cannot put a figure on it. He thinks it would be closer to 100 times than 30 to 40 times. That is footage of an incident at Hop Hill, which is a part of Tullamore, and in that footage, the Garda said he believed he could see a person putting his hands in his pockets, then holding something, and that's what he believes he saw. The defence barrister, however, said he believes the quality is super that cannot be said.
Yeah, and the Garda is alleging that person is Mr Puska, appearing to put something in his pockets.
Yes. So the last piece of evidence was, as I said, Garda Harney said that he worked for 3 months solid on the CCTV, then part-time for the rest of 2022.
Okay. That's very interesting, Mick. Thanks for the evidence for today. Will there be more I imagine there will be more CCTV probably next week.
I don't know. We'll have to see what the jury and judge see.
Yeah, so that concluded the evidence for today, Mick.
Yes, and we're back Monday at 2 o'clock, and you're going to be doing that day.
I will. Thanks very much for covering today. We'll be in and out, as we said, of this trial. We hope to cover every day of it. And just want to thank the listeners again for tuning into us on Spotify, Apple and YouTube. And thanks to yourself, Mick, and thanks to our producer, Kieran Bradley.
Thanks very much.